A battlefield soaked in blood. Shields clashing, swords slicing through the air, and war cries echoing across the dusty terrain. At the heart of it all, 300 warriors standing against an empire. But this is not just a story of war. It's a story of courage, defiance, and a battle that would echo through history for centuries. The year is 480 BC. The Persian Empire, the most powerful force the world had ever seen, is on the march. At its helm, King Xerxes, a ruler determined to bring Greece to its knees. But standing in his way is one man, King Leonidas of Sparta. A warrior. A leader. A legend. With just 300 Spartans by his side, he would defy an army of hundreds of thousands, turning a narrow mountain pass at Thermopylae into the stage for one of history's most legendary last stands. But how did it come to this? What drove these 300 warriors to face certain death? And what kind of man was Leonidas, the king who dared to defy a god-king? This is the story of bravery, sacrifice, and a battle that changed the course of history. Stay with us as we journey back to ancient Greece, uncovering the truth behind the legend, the strategy behind the war, and the legacy that still inspires warriors and leaders to this day. Long before he became a legend, Leonidas was just another boy in Sparta, born into a society where weakness was not an option. Sparta wasn't like other Greek city-states. It was a warrior society, built on discipline, strength, and absolute loyalty to the state. From the moment a Spartan child took their first breath, their fate was decided. They would either become warriors, or they wouldn't survive at all. Leonidas was born into the royal Aegead dynasty, but unlike most kings, he wasn't originally meant to rule. He was the younger son of King Anaxandridas II, which meant he had no claim to the throne. In Sparta, however, royalty didn't mean luxury. Whether prince or commoner, every boy had to endure the brutal Spartan training known as the agoge, a ruthless system designed to strip away weakness and forge warriors out of boys. And Leonidas was no exception. At just 7 years old, he was taken from his home and thrown into the agoge, where survival was the only goal. Here, children were starved, beaten, and forced into brutal combat. They learned to steal to survive, but if caught, they weren't punished for stealing, only for getting caught. It was here that Leonidas learned the true meaning of pain, discipline, and resilience. But Leonidas wasn't just another Spartan warrior. Unlike most of his peers, he carried the blood of kings, even if he wasn't in line for the throne. Did he ever dream of ruling Sparta? Probably not. At that time, he was just another boy fighting to prove himself, unaware that fate had something far greater in store for him. As Leonidas grew, he endured more trials that would shape him into the warrior he would one day become. By his teenage years, he had already survived brutal training, learned the art of combat, and understood that fear was a luxury only the weak could afford. The agoge had stripped him of comfort, but in return, it had given him an unbreakable spirit, a spirit that would one day lead him to defy an empire. Upon graduating from the agoge, Leonidas joined the Cryptia, an elite force of young Spartans sent into the wild to hunt and kill threats to the state. It was here that he learned not just to fight, but to think like a true Spartan warrior, ruthless, strategic, and fearless. He emerged not just as a soldier but as a leader, respected by his peers and feared by his enemies. But then, fate intervened. The Spartan throne, which had once been out of his reach, suddenly became his. His half-brother, the reigning king, Cleomenes I, died under mysterious circumstances. With no clear heir, Leonidas, the once overlooked warrior, rose to power. He wasn't a ruler who had grown up in palaces. He was a warrior king, molded by pain, trained in battle, and ready to lead his people. No one knew it yet, but this hardened Spartan, forged in the fires of discipline and war, would soon face the greatest challenge in Spartan history. And when that moment came, he would not back down. Leonidas did not inherit his throne through politics or privilege. He earned it through grit, discipline, and sheer survival. Unlike many rulers of his time, he had bled on the same training grounds as his soldiers, felt the sting of hunger, and endured the merciless trials of Spartan warfare. This made him different. He wasn't a king who sat behind palace walls, dictating orders. He was a warrior first, a ruler second. And that's exactly the kind of leader Sparta needed. By the time Leonidas took the throne around 490 BC, Sparta was at a crossroads. The Persian Empire, ruled by the ambitious King Darius I, had already begun expanding its influence into Greece. The first Persian invasion had been repelled at the Battle of Marathon, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. The Persians weren't done. A greater storm was coming, and Sparta had to be ready. Leonidas wasted no time proving himself. He reinforced Sparta's military dominance, strengthened alliances with other Greek city-states, and ensured that every Spartan was prepared for the inevitable war. Unlike other leaders, he did not rely solely on brute force. He was a tactician. He understood that victory would not come from sheer numbers alone, but from discipline, precision, and strategy. It wasn't long before he earned the respect of his people, not just as a ruler, but as a commander. Sparta had always been known for its elite warriors, but under Leonidas, they were more than just soldiers. They were a force of nature. Every Spartan knew that when the Persians returned, they would not fight for survival. They would fight for honor, for Sparta, and for the warrior code that defined them. But even as Leonidas prepared his people for war, across the Aegean Sea, a new king had taken the Persian throne, one far more ruthless than his predecessor. His name was Xerxes, and he was about to launch an invasion that would shake Greece to its core. Xerxes was not a ruler who tolerated defiance. When his father, Darius I, failed to conquer Greece, he saw it as unfinished business. And unlike his father, he didn't just plan a simple invasion, he prepared for total domination. With a massive army, rumored to be in the millions, he marched toward Greece, ready to crush anyone who stood in his way. By 480 BC, the Persian threat loomed over Greece like a dark cloud. City-states panicked. Many considered surrendering. But Leonidas saw this as the moment he had been preparing for his entire life. If Sparta fell, Greece would fall. There was only one way forward: stand and fight. When the Greek city-states gathered to decide how to face Xerxes, debates erupted. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to retreat. But Leonidas was clear: Sparta does not kneel. Sparta does not surrender. Realizing that the Persian army was too vast to face in open battle, Leonidas proposed a bold strategy: lure them into a narrow passage where their numbers would count for nothing. That place was Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a rugged mountain pass where a small force could hold off an entire army. But Sparta's ruling council, bound by religious festivals, refused to send the full army. Instead, Leonidas was given permission to take a small force, just 300 Spartan warriors, to delay the Persians until the rest of Greece could mobilize. Leonidas knew what this meant. He and his men were marching to their deaths. But to him, this was not a sacrifice. It was a duty. A warrior's greatest honor was to die defending his people, and he would ensure that Sparta's name would be carved into history, not with words, but with blood and steel. As he led his warriors toward Thermopylae, he knew this would be his final stand. But what he didn't know was that his name, his bravery, and his sacrifice would become immortal. The sun rose over the narrow pass of Thermopylae, casting long shadows over the rugged cliffs. Leonidas stood at the front, his 300 Spartans behind him, their red cloaks billowing in the morning wind. Before them stretched an army so vast it seemed endless. Xerxes had arrived. The Persian king, seated on a golden throne overlooking the battlefield, expected the Greeks to surrender. Instead, he was met with silence. Xerxes sent an envoy, offering Leonidas power, wealth, and the title of warlord if he would simply bow to the Persian Empire. But the Spartan king's response was as legendary as the battle itself: Molon Labe, come and take them. It was not a threat. It was a promise. Furious, Xerxes unleashed his first wave, thousands of Medes charging forward. But they did not face a broken, fearful army. They faced a wall of bronze and discipline. The Spartans, using their famous phalanx formation, locked shields and spears, creating an impenetrable barrier. The Medes crashed against them like waves against a cliff, but they could not break the Spartan line. For 2 full days, wave after wave of Persian soldiers hurled themselves into the Spartan wall, only to be cut down. Xerxes sent his elite immortals, his most feared warriors, expecting an easy victory. But Leonidas had studied their tactics, and his men fought with precision, striking down the immortals as if they were mere foot soldiers. The pass of Thermopylae became a slaughterhouse. The Persians had numbers, but the Spartans had strategy, training, and an unyielding will to fight. Xerxes, humiliated by his failure, watched as his best troops fell. He needed another plan.
And then, treachery found him.
A Greek traitor, Ephialtes, revealed a hidden mountain path that would allow the Persians to surround the Spartans. Leonidas had fought countless enemies, but there was one thing even he could not defeat: betrayal. Under the cover of darkness, thousands of Persian soldiers marched through the hidden trail, encircling the Spartans. At dawn, Leonidas' scouts confirmed his worst fear: they were surrounded. There would be no escape. Leonidas had a choice: retreat and live, or stay and die. But to a Spartan, there was no greater honor than dying in battle. He turned to his men, knowing their fate was sealed, and spoke his final command: "Eat well, for tonight we dine in Hades." Realizing the end was near, he ordered most of the Greek forces to retreat, sparing them for the battles to come. But the 300 Spartans, along with 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans, chose to stay, determined to fight to the last breath. As the Persians closed in, the Spartans abandoned their phalanx formation, drawing their swords for a final desperate charge.
Blood stained the earth.
Spears shattered.
Swords broke. But still they fought.
Leonidas, at the heart of the battle, cut down Persian after Persian, refusing to fall. But then, the inevitable happened. A storm of Persian arrows rained down, striking him. The king who would not kneel, the warrior who defied an empire, collapsed onto the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen brothers. The Spartans fought until the very last man was dead. When the dust settled, the pass of Thermopylae was silent. The Persians had won, but at a cost so great that Xerxes himself was shaken. He had expected a swift conquest. Instead, he had witnessed the unbreakable spirit of Sparta. Though Leonidas and his warriors perished, their sacrifice was not in vain. Their defiance ignited Greece, uniting the city-states against Persia. Just months later, the Greeks, inspired by Leonidas' stand, defeated the Persian Empire at the Battle of Plataea, ensuring that Sparta, and all of Greece, would remain free. Leonidas had fallen, but his legend had only just begun. His name would echo through history, a testament to courage, defiance, and the power of a few warriors to change the fate of a civilization. The sun hung low over Thermopylae, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of blood, sweat, and war. Leonidas, his bronze armor dented and stained with Persian blood, stood at the center of his warriors. His 300 Spartans, their numbers reduced but their spirits unbroken, gripped their weapons tighter, knowing what was to come. By now, Xerxes had grown impatient. The losses he had suffered at the hands of this tiny force were more than just a military embarrassment. They were a stain on his empire's reputation. The great king of Persia, who ruled lands stretching from Egypt to India, had been held back by a mere handful of Greeks. This defiance could not go unpunished. With reinforcements swelling his army to over 100,000 troops, Xerxes prepared his final assault. His goal was no longer just victory, it was total annihilation. The Spartans would not simply be killed, they would be erased. No graves, no monuments, just a bloody reminder that Persia would not tolerate defiance. But as the Persian forces prepared for their final charge, Leonidas did something unexpected.
He laughed.
A deep, guttural chuckle that carried through the Spartan ranks. His men followed suit, their laughter cutting through the tension like a blade. To an outsider, it would have seemed insane, but to the Spartans, this was the ultimate show of defiance. They had already won. They had exposed Persia's weakness. They had proven that a few hundred warriors, with enough discipline and courage, could hold back an empire. Their deaths were inevitable, but their legacy was immortal. With a nod to his warriors, Leonidas raised his spear, signaling the final stand. And with a deafening roar, the Spartans charged. The battlefield erupted into chaos. The Persians, expecting broken, exhausted soldiers, instead found themselves facing a storm of fury. The Spartans fought like demons, cutting through enemy ranks with terrifying precision. Shields shattered, spears splintered, and the cries of dying men filled the air. Leonidas fought at the front, his blade a blur of death. His strikes were precise, every move honed from a lifetime of training. He fought not as a king, but as a warrior, a man who refused to kneel. But no matter how many Persians fell, more swarmed in. The Spartans were slowly being pushed back, their formation breaking under sheer numbers. The pass that had once given them an advantage was now a death trap. Then came the moment that would seal their fate. From the cliffs above, thousands of Persian archers took position. Xerxes, unwilling to risk more of his soldiers in direct combat, gave the final order. A dark cloud of arrows blotted out the sun, raining down upon the Spartans in a merciless storm. Leonidas, pierced by multiple arrows, dropped to one knee. Blood trickled from his lips, but he did not fall. He looked up, eyes burning with defiance, as if daring death itself to take him. His Spartans, wounded but unbroken, fought to the last breath. Even as their weapons were lost, they used their fists, their teeth, anything to keep fighting. They would not surrender.
And then, silence. The dust settled.
The battlefield was littered with bodies, but not a single Spartan had fled. They had died standing. Xerxes, watching from his throne, was shaken. He had won, but at a cost far greater than he had anticipated. The Spartans had made him bleed. And worse, they had inspired all of Greece. Leonidas' body was crucified, his head severed and placed on a spike. But his death was not the end. It was the spark that ignited an inferno. The Greek city-states, once divided, now stood united. And just a year later, at the Battle of Plataea, the Greeks would have their revenge. Leonidas had fallen, but his legend had risen. And legends never die. The battlefield at Thermopylae was silent. The last Spartan had fallen, but not in fear or retreat. Every single one had died fighting. The Persians, despite their overwhelming numbers, had paid a heavy price. Thousands of their soldiers lay dead, their bodies piled high where the Spartans had made their final stand. The pass was soaked in blood, but the Spartan defiance had turned it into something greater, a monument to courage. Xerxes stood over the fallen Leonidas, gazing down at the warrior king who had defied an empire. This was supposed to be a swift conquest, an easy victory that would send a message to the rest of Greece. Instead, it had become a costly, humiliating struggle. In a final act of spite, Xerxes ordered Leonidas' head cut off and his body crucified, a warning to those who dared to resist Persia. But the message did not inspire fear. It ignited rage. The Spartan warriors who had retreated, carrying word of Leonidas' last stand, spread the tale across Greece. The sacrifice at Thermopylae became a symbol of defiance, a call to war. No longer were the Greek city-states divided by their rivalries. They now had a common enemy, and they would fight as one. As Xerxes pushed deeper into Greece, his massive army encountered resistance at every turn. Inspired by Leonidas' sacrifice, the Greeks refused to surrender, knowing that every battle was now a continuation of Thermopylae. But the true turning point came just months later, when Athenian naval forces led by Themistocles lured Xerxes into a trap at the Battle of Salamis. The Persian fleet, though massive, was outmaneuvered in the narrow waters. Greek warships struck with precision, destroying the Persian navy and cutting off Xerxes' supply lines. Xerxes, realizing that his invasion was crumbling, abandoned Greece and returned to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius to continue the fight. But the damage was already done. The once mighty Persian invasion was now a desperate struggle for survival. The final blow came a year later, at the Battle of Plataea. The combined Greek forces, now fully united under Spartan leadership, crushed the remaining Persian troops. The Persian Empire, once unstoppable, had been humbled. Greece had won. And the man who made it all possible? A fallen king who had stood with 300 warriors against an empire. Though Leonidas had died, his legacy was immortal. His name was spoken not in whispers of defeat, but in shouts of victory. The Greeks had defended their homeland, proving that freedom was worth any sacrifice. Back in Sparta, the loss of their king was a heavy blow. But it was not met with mourning, it was met with pride. To die in battle was the ultimate honor for a Spartan, and Leonidas had done so in the greatest way possible. His wife, Gorgo, refused to weep. When asked how she endured the loss, she simply responded, "Because he lived as a Spartan should." In the years that followed, Sparta continued to dominate as a military power, and the story of Leonidas grew into legend. His name became synonymous with courage, resilience, and sacrifice. The Pass of Thermopylae became a sacred place, and a monument was erected in his honor, bearing the famous words, "Go tell the Spartans passerby, that here, obedient to their laws we lie." Even in death, Leonidas led his people. His example set the standard for Spartan warriors for generations to come. And his legend traveled far beyond Greece, inspiring warriors, leaders and nations for centuries. Xerxes, on the other hand, returned to Persia a broken man. His once mighty empire had been shaken to its core, and his invasion of Greece had turned into one of the greatest failures in military history. He had conquered lands, but he had never conquered the spirit of those who resisted him. Leonidas' defiance became a lesson for all time, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, a few brave warriors could stand against tyranny. And though Sparta itself would one day fade, the name Leonidas would never die. The name Leonidas did not fade with his death, it grew larger than life. His stand at Thermopylae became more than just a battle, it became a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of resistance. The world had seen empires rise and fall, but few stories of defiance burned as brightly as that of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. In Greece, Thermopylae became sacred ground. The monument erected there bore the immortal words, "Go tell the Spartans passerby, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." For Spartans, Leonidas was the ideal warrior king, the embodiment of everything they stood for, discipline, duty, and fearlessness in the face of death. His actions set the standard for future generations of Spartan warriors, reinforcing the idea that Spartans never surrender, never retreat. But his impact went beyond Sparta. The Greek city-states, once divided by endless rivalries, had found unity through his sacrifice. His last stand inspired them to continue the fight, leading to the victories at Salamis and Plataea, which ultimately drove the Persians out of Greece. Without Thermopylae, there may never have been a free Greece. That freedom would, centuries later, pave the way for the rise of Western civilization. Greek ideals, democracy, philosophy and individualism, would shape the modern world. And Leonidas' defiance against tyranny became an eternal lesson. One man's courage can ignite a revolution. Even Alexander the Great, who conquered the Persian Empire over a century later, admired the Spartan king. Some say he paid respects at the site of Thermopylae before marching east, proving that Leonidas' legacy reached even the greatest conquerors. Leonidas' influence extended far beyond ancient Greece. His name became a symbol of military strategy, leadership, and heroism across the centuries. During the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered the ideals of ancient Greece, Leonidas was celebrated as a symbol of human bravery and resistance. Writers and historians immortalized his story, ensuring that future generations would never forget his sacrifice. In modern times, his legend continues to inspire. Military academies across the world study Leonidas' leadership, his ability to hold a position against overwhelming odds, and his strategic use of terrain. His story has been retold in literature, theater, and cinema, reaching millions across the globe. Perhaps the greatest proof of his lasting impact is that his name still sparks a fire in those who hear it. From ancient warriors to modern soldiers, from revolutionaries to freedom fighters, the lesson of Leonidas and his 300 remains the same.
Stand firm.
Defy tyranny. Even in death, you can achieve victory. Leonidas did not live to see his true impact. But he did not need to. His actions spoke louder than time itself, echoing through history, an eternal reminder that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. The story of Leonidas and the 300 Spartans is not just about a battle. It is about defiance in the face of impossible odds. It is about a king who refused to surrender, a handful of warriors who chose death over dishonor, and a moment in history that changed the course of the world. Leonidas did not march to Thermopylae expecting to survive. He knew it was a suicide mission. But he also knew that their sacrifice would ignite a fire that could never be extinguished.
And he was right.
His last stand gave Greece the time and inspiration it needed to unite against Persia. It led to the victories at Salamis and Plataea, ensuring that Greece, and its ideals, would live on. Without that resistance, the world as we know it might have been very different. Even today, his name echoes through history. His courage is studied in military academies. His leadership is admired by warriors and strategists. His story is told in books, films, and legends. But perhaps the most powerful lesson of Leonidas is this. Victory is not always about survival. Sometimes, it is about standing your ground, no matter the cost. His death was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater, a symbol of bravery that would inspire generations. So now, centuries later, we still remember him. Not as a king who fell, but as a legend who rose beyond time.